Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You are listening to the NTC podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Washington. My good friend Colin, also of the NTC team, is joining me for another podcast episode. This is number 47. Glad to have you guys back on with us. We're excited to get back into the studio here to record another episode for you guys. It's hard to believe, but we're already a good way through the NBA campaign. I mean, as of today,
Right.
we're looking at most teams have played 14, 15, 16 games so far. It's pretty wild,
Crazy.
Colin. I feel like we had just jumped on here to talk about the start of the season,
I
so
know.
time is
I
really
know.
flying.
We're a month in. Are we over a month in or just about? It's
I think we're
wild.
right about a month. Today's the
That's crazy.
18th, and I think opening day in October was about this same date, so
Yeah.
about a month in.
Flying
Wild
by.
to think about. Yep. But I mean, you know how the saying goes: time flies when you're having fun.
That's right.
And I know for myself, I've been having a lot of fun with these games. So excited to dive into a few of the storylines here today. Before we get into that, however, I wanted to shout out our sponsor of NTC, Bet99 Sportsbook. We've been partnering with them ever since the NBA campaign started. And they have some great resources over on their website that you guys can check out. If you're looking to get into the betting game, now is a great time. If you're looking to place bets on maybe some of the awards here coming up, I was listening to JJ Redick's podcast, and they partner with DraftKings, and they were giving out some early odds of most improved player and sixth man of the year. So those are also already always like great storylines to follow and put some bets on. So if you're looking to get into that, Bet99 Sportsbook is your place to go. So definitely give them a look if you're into that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Uh, I think we're ready to get going, Colin. So let's go ahead and tackle our first
Let's do
topic
it.
of the day. This is right in your wheelhouse. This is actually a good recommendation that you had placed before we came on here today. But this is definitely kind of like a CBA nerd out type of storyline here that we like to tackle over at NTC. But the first one up here today is going to be the Celtics and their disabled player exception that they were recently granted. Just a brief overview, and of course, Colin, you can go into a little more detail here in a minute. But basically, what this entails is it is an exception that is granted to an NBA team if there's a player on their roster that a panel, a determination of play panel, has made a decision that they will be out at least through, I believe it is June 10th of the following year. So if they determine that, they are granted an exception that is worth about half. Um, just looking up the description here, 50% of the player's salary or the amount of the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. So Gallinari falls into the latter part of that, where his contract value of this past season is worth about 6.4 million. So the Celtics were granted a disabled player exception worth 3.2 million, exactly half of that. So they can use that. I believe it's up until January 15th. They can apply for that exception, and they can go ahead and find a player that I believe has to be at the last year of their contract. So it can't be a player that's has a 4 or 5 year deal left or 3 years. It has to be somebody that's coming off of their contract next season. So just a few little general points of that exception. It's definitely something that you don't like to see. Basically means that a player is going to miss the entire season for a team, which it's inevitable. It's going to happen to several teams throughout the NBA calendar. It's just a part of the game. But the NBA does build in a way for these teams to somewhat compensate for that. Obviously, half of the non-taxpayer mid-level is not quite enough to compensate usually for the guy you lose, but it is something. It's better than nothing. I'm sure these teams are glad that they have that at their disposal. So, Colin, when it comes to the finer points of this, this exception here, what should we know about the details of this exception as far as the stipulations to it, the exactly what you can do with that. What do you have from your side that you can provide the listeners here when it comes to this exception?
Yeah, sure. So just a couple things to clarify as far as the parameters surrounding the exception, and we're going to get a little nerdy here. That's what we love to do here on
Let's
a
do
no
it.
trade clause to open things up. But
Yep.
as far as the salary amount, so the first thing that's interesting, it's not like every other exception in the CBA that it's just automatic. Here, you have to apply to the league and get granted the exception, and basically a panel, like you said, has to determine that they believe that the player is going to be out through the entire season through June 15th. And if they believe that they will, then they get granted the exception. The exception is going to be the amount of either it's actually the lesser of half of the injured player's salary or the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. So in this situation, they applied for Gallinari's injury. That was his salary was the taxpayer mid-level, so it was 6.6 and change. So they get the 3.2, and then they get a kicker of $100,000. So it's around $3.3 million. A couple of the interesting points here. It kind of is a hybrid between a trade exception and a taxpayer or non-taxpayer mid-level exception, because you can use it both to sign somebody and you can use it in a trade. So essentially, during the season, what they can do up through it's actually they can use it. So you can apply for it up through January 15th. They can use it up through, I believe it's either March 10th or March 15th. And what happens is they can use it to either sign a free agent, they can use it to so that they can use it on the buyout market, they can use it to claim a player off of waivers, or they can use it in a trade. Um, Now it's only $3.3 million, so you wouldn't think they'd trade for two players anyway, but you can only use it to acquire one player. And when you're either claiming a player off of waivers or trading for the player can only have 1 year left on his deal. And if you're signing a player, it can only be for 1 year. Just to look back in history, ironically, the Celtics were one of the, I think they were the last team to use the disabled player exception, or at least recently, when Gordon Hayward had that gruesome injury. They ended up using it to sign Greg Monroe.
Mm,
I think was he a buyout? I think he was, when they signed him for $5 million.
I believe
Um,
so.
yeah, so a couple of just interesting tidbits about this is it doesn't open up an extra roster spot. So they still have to work out the roster spot for the player. Now, obviously, the injured player won't be on the team. But here's the interesting thing: is it doesn't necessarily mean that the injured player can't come back. It doesn't completely disqualify that player. So technically,
Right.
if Gallinari was able to make some kind of miraculous return, he'd still be able to come back and play. They'd have to be able to open up that roster spot for him, but he could still come back technically and play for them. He's not disqualified from coming back, which is really interesting.
Definitely. Yeah, those are definitely some of the finer points of the exception that some people may not be aware of. As we know all too well, when it comes to the CBA, there's a lot of finer details that you really have to dig for, and you have to know what you're looking for. One more tidbit on that exception is the fact that this is an exception. Like you said, they have to apply for it. If they're denied this exception, which does happen from time to time, you cannot immediately apply for a new one. There's a waiting period of 90 days before you can submit another request, and it has to be a different injury, or it has to be a re-aggravation of the same injury. So just a couple of little details that are interesting to note when it comes to this exception. I think of it like you went and took a driving test. When you were younger and
Mm.
you weren't able to pass, and they tell you, "Oh, come back in a week or come back in a month or whatever," and you're just devastated. And
Was this
you
you?
know, just in general. Luckily, I didn't
I'm not driving
fail my
around
first
either.
attempts. Yep. Yep. Yeah, I know some people are in that position. So anybody listening, I feel for you, but that's how it goes in the NBA. Sometimes some of these things you can't immediately re-up and try it again. So definitely something we wanted to note here, as it is an interesting detail. And some teams do encounter this from time to time, losing players to injury, as you mentioned, Colin, through June 15th of the following season. So
Yeah, and one other point to make is the whatever the replacement player signs for, although it's an exception where they can continue to sign that player over the salary cap, it still counts towards their team salary as far as luxury tax purposes. So if a team is right under the luxury tax, I think this happened with Cleveland a few years ago. They're right under the luxury tax, and they got granted the disabled player exception for Ricky Rubio. So they were able to, they had the ability to sign a player for like $8 million, but if they did, they were going to go into the luxury tax. So they had to make that decision of whether they're still going to go into the luxury tax. It doesn't absolve them of getting taxed at that point too.
That's an important note to make. And if for the Celtics' point of view, it doesn't really matter for them since they're so far over the tax already. So it's not really something they're counting the pennies on this
Yeah,
deal. But
just a bigger check to write, but yeah.
exactly,
Hmm.
yeah, because it does multiply. The farther you go up into the tax. So I mean, for the Celtics, it's not going to be a 3.2 million signing. It's going to be a little bit more than that, just
Right.
because they're over the tax by quite a bit actually. Based on what we have on our website right now at no trade clause, it's about 25 million, over the tax. So, for the Celtics, it's going to be a big check they have to write to the league, but they're a contender. They're in the
Yep.
mix to potentially be in the finals, win a championship, and it's just the price you have to pay if you want to be one of the elite teams in the league.
Yep. Absolutely.
So we know the Celtics have had a great season so far. I mean, they have one of the best records in the league through about 15 games. But there is a team that is also doing pretty well to this point that may not have expected. I know I didn't expect going into this season. Believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Sacramento Kings over on the West Coast. They're making noise at 8-6 as of today, November 18th. So pretty impressive play from this team so far. And if you're wondering if that is coming on the back of some improved defensive play, it is not that. Looking at their defensive rating here so far, I mean, this is cleaning the glasses rating. Points per possession, they're giving up 115, which ranks 27th in the league. So they're not a revived team on the defensive end. They're actually just as bad on defense as they have been in the past several seasons. I mean, they haven't ranked any better than 18th since the last time they made the playoffs in 06. So that's a storyline that hasn't really changed here recently. Another note to make regarding one of their stats here, their efficiency differential is plus 2.6 as of today. This can always change as we go through the calendar, but that's the highest rating they've had also since their playoff season in 06, where they were plus 1.7. Every other season between then and now has been a negative efficiency differential, which is
Hmm.
just crazy to think about. Um, they have had trouble getting to 40 wins. I don't think they've had a 40-win season since they made the playoffs back in 2006. So it's really wild to think about how bad this team has been for this long. But better days are on the horizon. De'Aaron Fox is having a great campaign so far. He's building a great sense of chemistry with Sabonis. Keegan Murray has been a great pick for them with his spot up shooting ability, just his ability to be a solid wing defender, pairing up with Harrison Barnes. That has been a great pairing for them so far. Snatching Malik Monk from the Lakers, I think, was a solid deal for them. They're actually really strong at guard. You look at the rotation between Fox, Malik Monk, Davion Mitchell, Terrence Davis also having a strong campaign. They're off the bench. So, I mean, they're loaded at guard and they have some solid play. They actually have some wings now. That was one of their big weaknesses over the past few years was wing play, and they've addressed that here in a big way. So their offense is where they're making their money so far. So through today, November 18th, they currently rank second in points per possession at 117.7. So this is elite. This is a team that's winning on the back of their offensive play. They're going to games looking to outscore teams, not necessarily shut them down. They play at quite a quick pace. Basketball Reference has them ranked at 8th out of 30 in terms of pace in each game, which is pretty impressive. And then you go down and look at their schedule, and you may say they've been loading up on an easy schedule. I would say that their schedule has been closer to the more difficult side, just looking at their first 14, 15 games. They're currently on a 5-game winning streak that started with the win against the Cavaliers at home, which is very impressive. And then you look at some of their other wins. They beat the Warriors back on Sunday. They beat the Nets this past Tuesday. Some of their other wins also include the Miami Heat, which was back on the 29th, which was an impressive clutch win by 6. And some of their other wins are a little bit easier, like the Lakers. The Hornets was a win. Their last game was against the Spurs. So it's been a little bit of a mix, Colin, but overall, they've had a really great season so far, and it may not last. Maybe the Kings are going to come back in some way, shape, or form later in the schedule. But as of today, 14 games in, they might be the most surprising team in the league. They're up there with the Jazz, obviously, but they've had some really inspiring plays so far. What are some of your thoughts on how this team has fared so far? And do you believe that this team could sustain this play as we get closer to the All-Star break and going down the stretch of the season? I think you're on mute, Colin. Happens to the best of us.
Yeah, for some reason I couldn't hear you, and then I went on mute for some reason. But as far as your second question there, you know, I'm not sure that they can sustain it for the entire season. And I think that they might be able to sit just under 500, which, is probably better than a lot of people would say. But I think as some of these teams that are underperforming that we're going to talk about start getting right and performing better, they're going to start taking over, and their talent's going to take over. But man, the Kings have been super, super impressive. And I was actually talking to Anil, another member of No Trade Clause, yesterday about a few of the GMs that might be on the hot seat, and we were talking about Monty McNair being one of them, and it kind of gives reason towards a few of the moves that he made to kind of maybe speed up the process here, bringing in Sabonis a couple of years ago and now bringing in Herter this year, right? And people might have questioned, why are you doing that? Just let it build. But they need to get to the playoffs at some point here, right? So bringing those guys in, and it seems like it's been working. And on top of that, not only did he bring those guys in, and it seems to be working, but they have a ton. They're going to have a ton of flexibility after this year as far as the contract situation. I mean, they only have seven players under contract after this year, and the majority of them are players that they're going to want to stick around, and they're not for a significant amount of money after De'Aaron Fox. So they're in a really good position to even make a move in free agency after this year too. So regardless of how they continue to perform, if they continue to improve and bring the energy that they've been bringing for the rest of the season, then hopefully I just really hope they make the playoffs. They just deserve it. The Sacramento just deserves to see them make the playoffs. And honestly, good for Mike Brown if they do too. I mean, that guy kind of deserves it as well. After leaving Cleveland and going around as an assistant, it would be great to see him make it. But man, it's really exciting to see them play. Seeing that game on TNT, it was hilarious watching Charles and Shaq pretend to know or pretend that they've been watching these Kings, and then seeing them on TNT and seeing them just go after the Brooklyn Nets and seeing the energy in the crowd. I could not believe how packed the Kings, how packed that place was, and how crazy they were going. I mean, it was exciting to watch, and hopefully they can keep it going, and maybe they will.
I mean, they certainly could. I mean, going into the season, I had them pegged as a 10-11 seed. So as far as their record, I'm about where you had mentioned them finishing before, somewhere around 500, a little bit less than 500. Right now, they're 2 games over 500. So they're kind of in that range where you'd expect them to be a play-in team. I don't think they're going to be a straight-up playoff team like they can avoid the play-in. But I think they're going to be able to sustain a somewhat decent level of play, get away from being one of those doormats that you go into your schedule looking at the Kings and saying, like, we don't have much to worry about today. I mean, as you mentioned, that TNT game against the Nets was an eye-opener for me as well. Just looking at their inspired play, they're flying around the court. Their energy was awesome. They were moving the ball. They had some strong shooting, which is how they've built themselves to a number 2 overall offensive rating so far. Their shooting has been awesome, and Kevin Huerter is a big part of that. And I get why their GM wanted to bring in Kevin Huerter, Sabonis. At initial, first glance, bringing in Sabonis and shipping out Halliburton, a lot of us were just scratching our heads saying, like, why would you give up a player as talented as Halliburton? And I think they're going to be hurt in the long term overall making that move. But in the short term, I think it is a good play. And you have to think about, if you're a GM, you're not thinking about, I mean, you do have to think about the future, but obviously, I mean, if you don't stick around long enough to see that future, it doesn't really matter. Right.
You got to kind of balance the two, right? I mean, that's
exactly
the tough part.
Exactly. I mean, you play in Sacramento, you play in a decent market, you play in a pretty new arena. You want to be able to fill the stands like they did the other night on TNT. You want to be able to give this team the fans something to look forward to, something legitimate to promote to the fans. So I understand why he did it. Again, I do think it's going to backfire at some point. Sabonis is already getting up there into his later 20s. At least they do have Herter under a good contract at a good age. We'll see how it goes going forward. But for this year, I think they're in good shape. Just looking at all their contracts, like you said, they will have flexibility going forward. So if they want to reinvent the roster a little bit, going next year into the future years, they do have that option. But overall, I think they do have a really good team on their hands, at least relative to the past. I can't believe it's been this long. 16 years is something it's crazy to think about. There are teenagers alive today in high school that have no memory of this team being in the playoffs.
That's wild.
Which
yeah,
blows my mind.
You're talking about getting your driver's license. Kids are getting their
Right.
driver's license right now, and they had never seen the Sacramento Kings in the playoffs.
That's wild. And I think I saw a graphic recently that said, I don't think there is an active player today that has played against the Kings in the playoffs, which insane, absolutely insane.
Wow.
But this team is on the right track, and I think they are turning it around. So I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm excited to watch the Kings this season. I look at their games on League Pass. I get hyped for it. They have a good energy about them. They play together. Mike Brown, you give him a nice little shout out earlier, and I think it's well deserved. He's been an assistant for quite a while. He was a head coach back in the Cleveland days with LeBron, but he's having a great effect. It's not the effect that we thought it might have. We thought that his defensive system would take hold and maybe bring them up a little bit on that end, but it's been their offense that's carried them to this point, which is really fun to see, and I do hope they can keep it up. It will add a little bit of intrigue to this already fun season.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't think there's any reason for the Kings or Kings fans to really panic or have any sort of anxiety about their team. They're hype right now, but there are a few fan bases on the other side of the equation that are stressing a little bit. I'll go ahead and admit it. I'm one of them. As a Heat fan, I'm stressing a little bit. It's been a less than ideal start for Miami. We will get to them in a minute. But let's start off with one team that, maybe it is time to panic a little bit. Just looking at how they've started, looking at their record, some of their numbers. So I'm going to give you 4 teams, Colin. I'm going to mention 4 teams, and we are both going to give them a number between 1 being not worried at all, and 10 being a completely full-on panic, sound the alarms. This team is going nowhere fast. So first team up is the Brooklyn Nets. I don't know what else to say about this team that we haven't already talked about or haven't seen in the media. But we know the storylines. Ben Simmons, the front office isn't keen on him, even though they've only played 15 or so games. Kyrie hasn't played in several games. There's so many things you could talk about. I'm going to go ahead and say it, Colin. I'm very concerned about this team.
What's the number?
My number is 8 out of 10.
Okay. You're being gentle.
I'm being gentle. Maybe I am being a little bit gentle. Maybe I should just sound every alarm in the building. They do have 2 of the best 15 to 20 players on the planet, so maybe that's why I'm not at a 10 out of 10. But I'm pretty high on the panic meter because KD has been fantastic so far. He's lighting teams up for 25 plus points. I think he's had 25 plus points every game so far they've played, which is incredible at his age, 34. It's really carrying them to some of these wins they've gotten. But you got to think about this. He's playing 35, 36 minutes a game at 34 years old. His usage rate is in the 30s. It's in, that's not where you want a guy to be at his age. I think he's going to burn out at some point. He's going to get hurt. I think it's just a time bomb waiting to go off. And if that happens, if and when it does happen, I think this team is going to sink, kind of like what happened last season, where I think it was KD missed several games, and I think Kyrie was also out, and they lost like 10 games in a row. I think it could get to be at that level again if KD is out. They rely on him so much for scoring. Credit to Royce O'Neal. He's been great. Credit to Joe Harris coming back from injury. Very solid play. They do have some other guys in the roster. Nick Claxton has had a solid season. But these aren't primary focal points for the offense. They can't sustain an offense over an entire game, even just big stretches of a game. So that's why I'm so worried about them so far. They haven't been able to capitalize on easy wins. Kyrie, you never know if he's going to play or not. So that's why I'm just a little bit concerned about this team going forward. Well, actually, a lot concerned, but I'm
Yeah.
assuming maybe you have a higher number than me. Where
Well,
are you at in that regard?
I mean, I would put it at a 10 for if you're going to be panicked about a team that's supposed to be a contender. Who are you going to be the most panicked about? And you say they do have the two of the best players in the world. Well, if he plays, yeah, but I saw a
Got to
stat
play.
for Kyrie that he was missing his 122nd game as a Brooklyn Net, and he's played 111, which
Wow,
is just a mind-blowing stat, and that was
crazy.
before these ongoing. So he's missed even more. He's close to like 130 games now, which is just
Jeez.
unbelievable. So when he plays, sure, but I mean, even when they were playing together, they were a play-in last year. They were a play-in team, and yeah, they've built up their support system, and they got Royce O'Neal, who's playing well, but it seems to be a disaster. Both forget about off the court, but it seems to be on the court. They seem to be a disaster other than KD. Their defense is shot, but and then you go off the court, forgetting about the Kyrie stuff. I don't know if you heard that recent KD interview when he's just complaining about the roster. I mean, he's complaining about his
Yep.
own roster and why he demanded
Yep.
a trade. I mean, that's just not how you build a winning team and in a winning culture. And when you're looking at the other teams ahead of them in the East, I just don't know how you don't panic at this point. Maybe they'll do what they did last year and struggle and have drama all the way through, but their talent carries them to a play-in team to get swept in the first round. But I think that the panic button has to be at a 10.
So definitely reason to be very concerned about this team, and I think we're on the same page. We're both very concerned.
Yeah. Which how
Uh,
can you not be? I mean,
yeah,
any reasonable person has to be.
of course, definitely. Relative expectations, they just aren't hitting the mark. Let me give you another couple of numbers here that may not necessarily like give crazy amount of hope for this team, but maybe I can get you to bring it to a 9. Maybe
Hmm.
maybe I can do that here real quick.
Okay.
So I'm looking at their numbers, season numbers in terms of their offensive rating, their defensive rating, points per 100 possessions. This is cleaning the glasses numbers here. I'm looking at every team in the league, so this is a league-wide rating. Scroll down to Brooklyn here. They're 20th in defensive rating. That's pretty normal for a Brooklyn team. They are usually not very strong in the defensive department.
Hmm.
However, they do have another category for past 2 weeks. So if we're trying to think of how many games the team plays over 2 weeks, I would say somewhere between 7 and 9 games,
Hmm.
probably. So their number over the past 2 weeks, their offense is mediocre at 16th in the league, 112 per 100 possessions. Their defense is actually second at 106.6 points per 100 possessions. Uh, so the point differential is at plus 5.8, almost 6, which is fifth in the league. And they are 5-3 over that span. I know that's not a great record. It's not like they went 8-0, but I think it's something that they can build on because typically Brooklyn teams have been all offense, no defense, bottom 5 in defense over the past couple of years. It's easy to see why when you have Kyrie out there, he doesn't fight over screens. He's not exceptionally, he doesn't have crazy size. But this season, it's a little bit different. Now, their offense has had some kinks to work out. I think part of that is because Kyrie is out. But with guys like Royce O'Neal joining the fold and Claxton getting a little bit better on that end, some of these pickups they made over the offseason, I think can give them a little bit of a backbone on defense to where they don't have to score 120 plus points every game just to have a chance. So that was another one of their numbers that kind of stood out to me and made me think, yes, it's still a ton of problems they have on this team. They're still probably not going to be a finals team, at least based on what we've seen so far. But maybe there's something different about this team that they haven't shown in past seasons that can inspire them a little bit, give them a little bit more hope beyond just scoring 1,000 points and trying to run teams off the court. So Just
Maybe
something else that
that
stood out to me.
that's good. I will say this about the last 14 days. They faced the Pacers twice, the Bulls, Wizards, Hornets. They did face the Mavericks, Knicks, Clippers without Kawhi, Lakers, and then the Kings put up 153 on them, and then the Blazers. So it wasn't
True.
exactly, the cream of the crop that they were defending against, but
True.
I will take that into account. The interesting thing that we'll have to see is, I think Kyrie is slated to come back now on Sunday. It'll be interesting to see how that shifts, how they play as far as defense, chemistry, and they're like you said, 5-3 in the last 14 days. We'll see if he is a net positive for them, or because he's pure talent, or if the chemistry comes off and they just fall back to what they were like early on in the season.
That's the trap they have to avoid.
Mm-hmm.
Falling into old habits, it's going to be tough for this team to break, especially with players' personalities like Kyrie and KD. They've been doing things one way for so long. It's going to be tough to change. But I think there are a few little silver linings, but overall, they still do have a lot of problems. And I wouldn't peg them as being in the contender conversation right now just because of all those different things they have to work out right now.
Yeah.
But moving on to our second team here, we do have the Timberwolves, which we all knew going into this season they were going to have growing pains. They're one of the only teams in the league that run a double big lineup, a Twin Towers lineup between Towns and Gobert. Predictably enough, they do have some problems on both ends of the court. This was crazy to me when I was reading John Hollinger's article about this team. They were ranked 28th in defensive rebounding percentage through Wednesday's games, which not sure that's possible. It doesn't seem like it should be. But that's one of the many problems they've been having so far. The offense has been clunky. I mean, you're trying to work through incorporating two bigs, one of which has played center basically his entire career, with a shot-hungry, talented guard in Edwards, and another shot-hungry, not quite star player in D'Angelo Russell, with another guy with McDaniels or whoever it is trying to kind of tie everything together at that 3 spot. So looking at their numbers here so far, not terrible. 13th, this is Clean the Glasses numbers. Basketball Reference could differ slightly, but 13th defense, 13th offense, which is not bad. Over the last 2 weeks, it's been their offense that has carried them. 116 on offense, which is good, 5th in the league, but also 116 on defense, not good, which is 26th in the league. So this is one of the issues I had about this trade. You bring in two bigs into your starting lineup. You want to incorporate Gobert. Obviously, he's a multi-time Defensive Player of the Year winner. The problem is both of these guys have to navigate tons of pick and rolls. Neither of them are great in that regard. And when you're playing Towns on a stretch 4, he can struggle.
Mm-hmm.
If he gets switched onto a guard, he can struggle. Same for Gobert. So they have to cover a lot of ground. And neither of these guys are the most nimble or agile players. So obviously their rim protection should be pretty good. But when it comes to the other facets of the court, not going to be so great. So I think that's one of the reasons why the defensive rating has been so poor, especially over the past 2 weeks, is because of those aspects of their team. I thought they had enough depth to get by with McLaughlin coming off the bench, Naz Reid, a good big man, but they haven't been able to really kind of produce the way that the Timberwolves have needed so far. So for my panic meter rating so far, I'm at a 6. I'm not full on alarm. They still have a lot of time to work this out. It is a big change. So I understand that they haven't had the best start, but there are still concerns with this roster overall that I think we all had when they made this trade because of their Twin Towers lineup. Where are you in terms of this team in regards to how bad it is so far, and can they turn this around?
Yeah, I'm not extremely panicked. I'm probably at a 3 or 4 here. I just think, like you said, there's plenty of time left to fix this thing, and they traded for a defensive centric center, and for basically all the reasons that you gave of why they're having so much trouble is, I think, why they can fix it is it's really just a strategy, and it comes down to strategy. It's not like they're putting in a top scoring all-star and it's just kind of a plug and play situation. They're going to be a defensive centric team where they have to work as a team and they have to have proper chemistry, and it's going to take time to get right. And I heard a lot of experts kind of go into this thing after the trade saying, it seemed like almost everybody was saying they're going to be good during the regular season and they're not going to be a great team, a great roster for a playoff run. And I just think everyone kind of assumed that they'd easily be good during the regular season, and kind of took for granted that their defense has to get right. And I think that while it is surprising, especially those rebounding numbers for sure are surprising, but I think you give it time. I think they'll rectify the situation. They're still 7-8. They're in a struggling West. Everyone's struggling out in the West right now, it seems. So
Mhm.
I never thought that they're a true contender anyway, but I think they'll get right. I don't think they're a team that's going to finish under 500.
No, for sure. I agree with that. I think they'll definitely improve on this start. Like you said, there's plenty of time left. So I'm
Yeah.
not, full on super concerned like, we are with the Nets. It's nothing like that. A little mildly concerned, I guess I would
Hmm.
say. But they do have a strong coach in Chris Finch that I think has, he has a lot up his sleeve. Looking at the different ways they can utilize maybe Edwards and the Twin Towers. There's definitely reasons to be optimistic as well.
Yeah.
So, like you said, plenty of time to turn it around. And I think that as long as the Wolves make the playoffs and make some noise in the playoffs, they're totally fine if they don't win a championship. I think we have to weigh the expectations relative to the team. And yes, they are underperforming, but it's not like they need to be a 1 or 2 seed in the West and make the conference finals or the finals in year one. So
Right.
it's an experiment. They do have time. They didn't build this for a 1 year stand. That has to work out now. Like the Nets and the Lakers are different. I mean, if that doesn't work out in the next couple of years, I mean, they're done.
Yeah.
But with the Wolves, they do have a little bit more time. One of their best players is only in his third season. Towns is still in his prime. So no reason to completely just go off the rails, because even if the season is disappointing, they still do have a few more seasons to work this out.
Absolutely.
So a team that may not have that much time to work it out. The Golden State Warriors are aging. Steph Curry is still playing at an extraordinary level. I mean, I was shocked by how well he is playing. I mean, I know that sounds crazy, but going into the season, I just assumed that, okay, it's Curry. I mean, he's still a great player, but surely it's to start to slow down at some point, right? I mean, he's getting into his mid-30s and all this crazy stuff, but he's actually not.
Yeah.
He's still doing pretty well for himself considering how old he is.
He looks
So
stronger. He looks
he
stronger.
does.
It's
He
crazy.
does. It really is wild to think about. Uh, my good friend Shane Young posted this on his timeline last night on Twitter. He's 42 of 45 at the rim so far this season. That's 76%. He posted an entire article about how well Curry is playing. This was before his 50-point game.
Yeah.
That's
Right.
actually wild. But he mentioned some things about how Curry is playing. He calls Curry the most incredible offensive presence in league history. Of course, you're going to argue MJ and Shaq and things like that, but the things he is doing, especially at his age, is really incredible. It's almost LeBron-esque what he's been able to do in his mid-30s. He completely bends defenses in a way that opens up the best shots possible for his teammates. I mean, it really is incredible. Uh, if Curry wasn't healthy, I don't know where this team would be. They're already underperforming. As of today, they're 12th in the West at 6-9. Colin, they haven't won a game on the road yet. I mean,
That's wild.
for a Warriors team, I mean, you would think this is 2010-11 Warriors, the way they're struggling on the road. Really just incredible. But going back to Curry for a second, the Warriors offense is 17 points per 100 possessions better when he's on the court versus when he sits.
Wow.
This is only behind the 16-17 season in terms of differential where it was at 18. So, I mean, he's carrying this team to a 6-9 record right now. And it may be a similar concern when it comes to Curry as we have with KD in terms of his load. Right now, I mean, looking at his minutes per game, he's playing at about 34 and a half, which is where he was last season. But typically, you don't want your best player that's 34, 35 years old to be playing about 35 minutes a game and you're still losing games. I mean,
Yeah, that's the problem.
That's not a recipe for success. So we'll see where we compare with this. I mean, I'm not full on panicking because they do have a championship core still. Yeah, Draymond is aging. Clay has looked awful so far in terms of his efficiency, but they do have some of the best shooters in the league still. Kevon Looney is a solid rim presence. They still have some good bench weapons they can go to in a pinch, like Jordan Poole, which I think he still has another level to reach. He's been a little bit underwhelming so far. So I'm at a 5 with this team. I'm not ready to completely just freak out. They still have trade chips if they want to make a midseason trade to shake things up. They still do have that avenue. Their tax bill will be pretty close to unfathomable if they do that, but I think they still do have a couple of options left to turn this thing around. They do have I think they have maybe the best player in the league right now with Curry the way he's playing, next to Giannis and guys like Embiid. So there's a little bit of reason to be optimistic. So I am a little bit worried, but I'm not overly concerned. Where are you at with the Warriors right now?
Yeah, the concerning part is their depth seems to not be performing and their defense isn't performing.
Yeah, the
So
defense has been rough.
yeah, and I think that's what's the scary part. But in perspective here, as far as the panic, look, they're in 12th in the West at 6-9. They're 4 games back from first place. So like, they're not that far. They're not that far out of just being right there. They can rattle off a few wins and they're just right back in it. We're not even as long as they make the tournament, everyone's going to be scared of them, and that's really all that matters. As long as they can stay healthy. What you're talking about is the bigger concern to me, and that is workload and making sure that they get rest, right? Because like you said, if he's playing 34 minutes a game, if they're 10-2, great, because as they build up these stack these wins, they can start resting them later on. But if they're fighting for a 4 seed to get home court just in the first round, and he has to keep playing those minutes, and they start piling up on all these aging players, I think that's more concerning. But overall, I'm probably at a 4. It's a championship team. I think they'll be just fine.
Yeah, I think we're in agreement on that point. 4 or 5, somewhere in there, I think is a good place to be in terms of a panic meter, which is not even really a panic in this situation. As you said, I mean, they still have a championship core. This team is almost unchanged from last year. So you have to expect that at some point they're going to regress to the mean, or I guess improve to the mean in some way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're not a first or second seed. Maybe they don't make the finals. But in terms of being a strong championship core that's well coached with an MVP caliber player, if his team could just win a freaking game, what we thought was solid depth. Wiggins needs to get back to his old ways in terms of how he played last season. There's still a ways to go in terms of the ceiling of this team. So they haven't won a road game. I can't imagine that would continue.
Now that would be wild.
Absolutely. So that's going to change at some point, which is going to level out their record. So yeah, I think they'll be fine. They got to work some things out. There's a little bit more pressure on this team because of where they are in their timeline. These guys are not getting any younger, so they have to make something happen this season. But the season itself is still young, so there's no reason to completely panic.
I agree.
One last team, Colin, to wrap things up. That's the team I'm fond of, Miami Heat. I'm wearing this shirt so I can remember the good old days, the 2020 Eastern Conference champions. So I wanted to give myself some good vibes before going into this segment here. But the Miami Heat are not doing great so far. I think that's a gentle way of putting it so far through the season. They currently rank 10th in the conference. They're at 7-8. So, I mean, they're actually doing better than the Warriors. They're one game better than the Warriors right now. They are about 5 games out of first, so still not a monumental gap between them and the top of the conference where they were last year. Here's where I'm concerned. This team can't stay healthy. I think, first of all, is a major concern. Yurtseven, it was reported, I think, earlier this week, he's going to miss much of the season. The front court depth was already very poor. You add in Yurtseven's injury, that's one of the worst case scenarios for this team. Tyler Hero has missed 6 games in a row. He might still be a few games left from returning with an ankle injury. That's a huge blow. I mean, he just became their starter after being 6th man of the year last season.
And his scoring that massive contract too.
He got the massive contract, exactly. So you don't want to sign a guy and then instantly see him miss 15, 20 games. That's not a great sign. Jimmy Butler, this is nothing new for him. He's going to miss, I would say, at least 15 games every season with nagging ailments. He's out tonight against the Wizards, I think, due to knee inflammation. That's concerning. I mean, he's getting older. He's going to need to be load managed because at some point after about 5 to 10 games, he will get hurt. That's very concerning. Kyle Lowry's play is diminished from his past, I would say probably 2 years ago now, where he was a borderline all-star. He's not that guy anymore. So more of a load on him in the absence of guys like Tyler Hero. Victor Oladipo. I don't know what happened. I thought he was good to go. I saw some great vibes coming from his camp before the season started. All of a sudden, he's not ready to play. He's not even close to being ready to play. I don't know what happened. I don't know if there was a setback, but he's not going to be back for quite some time. So that's 2 to 3 long-term injuries for this team, which is just not good to see. Bam has had to assume a huge load. Now he's hurt. He missed their past game, which they lost to the Raptors, which is not great. So across the board, I think it's just a lack of depth that's become even worse with injuries. I'm going to be honest here, Colin. I'm not going to sugarcoat this in terms of where they're looking right now. I started off at a 5 before we went on, but I think I talked myself into a little bit higher. So maybe more of a 6 to 7. I'm not going to say all hope is lost, but just looking at a flawed roster, it was already going to be like a slim to no margin of error. It's gotten worse.
Yeah.
And I think there's just so much of a load on Jimmy Butler and Bam and Tyler. Now they're hurt, and it's just like kind of like a snowball effect. So that's where I'm at. I don't know. Maybe I'm overreacting. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah. Well, it depends on – it's all relative, right? Because going into the season, I didn't necessarily think that they were too much of a contender because of exactly what you're talking about. Their margin of error was so slim. And where I would bring down your panic meter as a Heat fan is you can look at the injuries almost as you can look at it as 2 sides of the coin. As they have all these injuries and you can panic because of it. But the other side of the coin is they have all these injuries. They're 7 and 8. Once they get these guys back, then you can start really reassessing how this team is and if they're a contender, right? But the question is, when is that going to happen, right?
Exactly.
That's what you need. So the worst thing that you could see happen is they were all healthy right now and they're performing horribly, but they just can't get their full roster together, and it's almost like you could see it coming from the beginning. So but again, I saw, like I just said, we could see this coming from the beginning. So I don't see it as a major panic. I think that all you have to do is hope that these guys get healthy by the time towards a month or 2 before the playoffs, they get in the tournament. And then if they're fully healthy, they can make a run like they did similar to last year. But, other than that, so I would be at a 4 only because this is what I would expect to have happened anyway. And I didn't expect them to be significant contenders regardless.
That's fair. I mean, to be honest, I didn't either. I think they had already taken a step back from last year. So in that regard, it's not like I expected them to be a finals team and they're, playing at a, crazy bad level. I think the only reason why I'm a little bit higher than you is because, like you mentioned, when is that going to be that they're fully healthy? If Oladipo was a week or 2 away and Yurtseven was a week or 2 away, okay, we're
Right.
good. We know they're on the horizon. But just hearing that Yurtseven's injury is not season ending necessarily, but very severe to the point where he can miss a significant part of the season, and then Oladipo where there's no timeline, that's where I'm a little bit more a little bit more panicked. And then just looking at Bam and Jimmy, I'm like, are they hurt because of the lack of depth that's been exaggerated by those injuries has caused them to break down? That's where I'm like,
Yeah.
is it a cumulative effect?
Right.
Um, yeah, I mean this team is still well coached. They still have a
Right.
lot of great veterans on this team, so I'm not going to go to 8, 9, or 10, but I think 5 or 6 is reasonable just because I think the injuries themselves, some of these have been unexpected. They're playing not so much, but it's guys that I thought were going to be solid contributors for an entire season may not play most of the year. So I
Yeah.
guess that's where it comes from.
I think the bigger panic, the higher meter I would have is, what are you going to do the next year as far as roster building? It seems like the team is somewhat stuck unless Pat Riley has a trick up his sleeve. As far as it seems like the roster is kind of stuck the way it is. They signed Harrow to his extension. They have Butler. They have Bam. Lowry, you almost hope he retires. He's on the hook for 30 mil
Yep.
next year. So they're over the cap. What are they able to do to bring in that next big piece to take them to that next level, to make them that contender again, to get
Yep.
over that hump? That is where I would be more concerned is, are the Heat just going to be doing this in 23, 24 again?
Right.
You know?
That's a good point as well. I mean, their future is a little bit uncertain. Looking at, Jimmy's on contract. He just got an extension, so he's going to be around for quite a while. It's probably going to age very
Yeah.
poorly. Kyle Lowry has already aged poorly. I think one bright side on that front to kind of wrap up this podcast is that they do have some chips to trade. I mean, they do have Duncan Robinson's contract still on the books, worth quite a bit of money. They can turn into something. They have a few picks that they can leverage into something here if they want to make a move.
Yeah.
You look at a guy like Tyler Hero now that he is under contract. That's more money you can use in a salary match to get a decent type of guy back. So I do think that they have a few trade chips that they can utilize. So I wouldn't put it past Pat to make something happen. Uh, there's definitely, like you
He's
said,
done it
there is
before. He's done it before. I mean, he knows
exactly
how to make moves. The thing with Duncan is he's got 2 years left, and he's at 18 million next year, and then 19. I don't know who's going to want to take on necessarily that contract, because it's not a dump if it's 2 years, right? So
right.
that one's a little troublesome. And then maybe Lowry might be the salary dump, but you'd
Right.
basically have to be giving something up just to dump him off at that point.
Exactly. You got to show a
So
pick with them or something to
yeah,
sweeten the pot.
exactly,
Yeah,
just to clear space. But I don't
for
know.
sure.
It'll be interesting to see. But I'd be more concerned with that, and you just hope that they get these guys healthy towards the end of the year. Spo gets them together, and they can make some kind of crazy push. Um, but other than that, yeah, my panic meter would be higher as far as roster building for the next couple of years.
Hey man, you just shouted out. You just shouted out Spoelstra. There's a saying in Miami: "Spo knows." Uh,
Yeah,
he guided this team to a 30-11 finish after they started 11-30 a few years back. So, hey, after seeing that, I'd say anything's possible.
that's right. Hey, I mean, he did a great job last year too, and they came a shot away from making the finals. So
True,
you never know.
exactly. It's a long
It,
season.
it is. It is.
So we're gonna wind this thing down, Colin. But I want to thank you again for jumping on for another pod.
Absolutely. Always a
Always great
blast.
to have you. Yes, sir. Always great to have you great listeners join us for another pod. We'll be back next week with some more great content. Hopefully, these teams we've discussed can turn things around a little bit before our next pod. Um, hope that this season continues to be a fun one. As always, you can check out our website, notradeclause.com, for all your NBA resources. If you're looking to see certain trade exceptions, disabled player exceptions, our guy Neil that Colin just shouted out earlier is managing all that. So if you want to see the exceptions that each team has, break it down for yourself and see what's going on, you can do that. Draft picks, transaction log, NBA calendar has been updated, so that's something to check out. So it's all right there for you on our website. And we'll be working hard to ensure that we bring in some quality content for you on upcoming podcasts, working on bringing in some great guests going forward. So be sure to not go too far because that is coming your way. So thanks to everybody for tuning in again. We'll be back next week with more great content. And so until then, enjoy this NBA season and enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you soon.
See ya.